Martin Luther, who composed the hymn, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God," inspired by Psalm 46, wrote in the year 1528, "If you want to see the holy Christian church painted in glowing colors and in a form which is really alive, and if you want this to be done in a miniature, you must get hold of the Psalter, Book of Psalms, and there you will have in your possession a fine, clear, pure mirror which will show you what Christianity really is. Yea, you will find yourself in it, and the know yourself, and God himself, and all his creatures too." And so it is in Psalm 46 that we may find ourselves in it if we embrace the power of God's presence with us as our refuge, our strength, and our help. This psalm is unequivocal in expressing God's steadfastness, no matter what earthly calamity may befall us. As I explore the three parts of Psalm 46, you may want to refer to your insert in the bulletin. In verses 1 through 3, a cosmic disaster is described as the earth, mountains, and sea erupt in chaos. In the ancient worldview of the Near East, the mountains were seen as pillars anchored in the waters of the sea that held up the earth as well as the sky. Disturbance of the mountains would lead to collapse of both the earth and the sky as all fell into turbulent waters. While our understanding of our earth and its place in the universe has evolved, the natural disasters of volcanoes, earthquakes, and tsunamis still threaten a great many of God's children in our world. The lava spewing out of the Kilauea volcano in Hawaii, earthquakes in Haiti, Nepal, and Chile, tsunami in Japan, Thailand, and Indonesia. And yet we are assured that as God is our refuge and strength, we will not fear. In verses 4 through 7, instead of waters of tumult, we visualize waters of peace and blessing flowing through the city of God, Jerusalem, where God resides. Although there is no river in Jerusalem, the river may represent those flowing waters in the Garden of Eden. God's divine presence flows through Jerusalem, and God is seen as choosing to live among God's people, bringing joy to the community of faith. In verse 6 comes the assaults of kings and political attacks, but earthly kings cannot prevail against God's power and are quelled by God's voice. The God of Israel is present and tames both cosmic and historical chaos, bringing order out of disorder. In the final section, verses 8 through 11, we see divine victory as evidenced by earthly desolation, and then move to God's destruction of the weapons of war, pointing to God's intention for a future of peace. God then speaks, saying, "Be still and know that I am God." This well-known imperative is often interpreted as a call to a quiet and meditative state. But in the context of Psalm 46, it is a command to stop fighting and giving in to fear-based behavior. It is a command to stop scheming and quarreling. It is a command to recognize that the true power is in God. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Israel is our refuge. So, how do we, as this community of faith in Bloomington, find ourselves in Psalm 46 and embrace the power of God's presence with us as our refuge, our strength, our help? Given our geological location, landlocked and lacking mountains, our faith in God won't likely be tested by volcanoes, earthquakes, and tsunami. Given the summer humidity, we are not prone to the destructive fires that plague California and Colorado. In terms of natural disasters, we are somewhat prone to tornadoes and perhaps the tail end of a hurricane that moves north, and in certain areas, flooding. But God's promise of refuge, strength, and help encompasses all the possible conditions and situations that we as God's children will encounter over the course of our lives. Chief among them are the loss of a loved one, a debilitating condition, illness or injury, a broken relationship, all of which trigger fear of the circumstances, fear of the future, fear that we can't go on. So how is it possible not to fear if the earth shakes beneath us or flood waters consume us? How is it possible not to fear when the death of a loved one leaves us adrift, unanchored, plunged into despair, or we become incapacitated in some way? How is it possible not to fear? It is perhaps possible if we are able to see, to conceptualize, and then hold firm to the truth that behind the total collapse of all around us, God is with us no matter what the disaster, no matter what the loss. God is there, and that the significance of God's unceasing presence with us outweighs the significance of any earthly catastrophe. The significance of God's unceasing presence with us outweighs the significance of any earthly catastrophe. According to the theologian Richard J. Clifford, the psalm expresses the two sides of a life of faith. On the one hand, there are dangers among which is the possibility of personal and cosmic collapse. And on the other hand, there is God who has promised to be there for us. The psalm invites people of faith to hold steady even before nameless and limitless dangers. It does not promise escape from disturbance, but only from their power to destroy. In 1977, my sister was diagnosed with cancer, and she had 1.5 years of struggle with that disease before she was released from the earth. We spent many days together in her hospital room, and at one point when she was feeling particularly miserable, she asked me to pray. When I finished, she told me that I was her connection to God. As much as she wanted to feel God's presence, to know that God was her refuge and strength, she could not. But when I prayed with her, the connection was made. Together, the two of us, aware of God's unfailing presence, we often said to each other during that time with firm belief, ultimately, everything will be all right. Although I still miss my sister and wish that we might still be sharing our lives with each other, I felt that the significance of God's unceasing presence with us outweighed the significance of her untimely death. Until that experience with my sister, I had not understood the power that each of us who are blessed by God to be able to feel God's presence could in turn be able to connect another person to the presence of God. So Psalm 46 not only invites people of faith to hold steady even before nameless and limitless dangers, but to be the conduit for people who can't experience faith on their own, so that the truth of God's strength, refuge, and help can be known to all. As Christians, we no longer see God as residing exclusively in Jerusalem, although God is no doubt there. We know that God came to dwell in the living Lord Jesus, so that through him we might better understand the power and strength of God's love for us. God dwells in our places of worship. God dwells in our communities. And God dwells even in us. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear.